Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mormon Millennials Podcast. This is our first episode. So, like, a lot of other podcasts have, like, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, Gen X people and older. But there wasn't really a podcast out there that had the younger perspective. I mean, we are the me generation, so we do like talking about ourselves, so we couldn't really help ourselves but, like, put this thing together.
No, mostly, like, I think that it's important because the internet has changed immensely the climate in the church for young people. And I think that it's important for us who've grown up with it and are dealing with issues of history, dealing with issues of culture and theology, but in a more connected way than people have been able to do that before. I think that's what is important about our podcast and what sets it apart.
I also think that we grew up with a different view of Mormonism than those in the generation above us. Because if you go back and read conference talks from like the 70s and 80s, they're extremely different than the ones today. Yeah. Or the ones that when we were young. I mean, Mormonism, as we know, is not a static thing. It's constantly changing. It's very dynamic. And so we grew up with a different vision of what the church was than many people who are doing other podcasts. And so I think it's just interesting to see how younger people handle faith transitions, where they're encountering the questions earlier, and that's what I had to say.
Well, yeah, so I think because of the internet, we're able to, like, we can't hide from certain issues. We can't hide from certain ideas and historicity issues and documents that you could before the internet.
Yeah,
so
you have to go to the library.
Yeah,
you'd have to look at the Dewey
I'm not going to go through microfilm to find these sorts of things. But so the internet lowering the cost means that it's just out there, and that we start off exposed. Even if we don't seek them out, we know that these things exist. Yeah. And so I think the millennial generation doesn't have the shock factor necessarily that exists with others when they find these certain things that lead to faith crises.
Well, I was just going to say, I read a lot of the stuff in the letters of the CES director, like about Joseph Smith's geography and stuff, online when I was like 13. And so I think a lot of people who are in the older generation didn't hear about this stuff until like their 40s. For them, it was like anti-Mormon propaganda pamphlets put out there that was like... Yeah,
you have to like get it handed to you by someone on the street.
Yeah. You're in Salt Lake for something, and there's a guy at the corner trying to hand it out.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and plus, like, we don't have, like, marriages or, like, established careers or things like that make these kind of faith transitions so much more difficult. Like, we don't have to go home and tell our wife, hey... Like,
right.
I don't believe in the church anymore. Or, like, we don't have our wife coming to us and saying, oh, I don't believe in the church anymore. Like, we don't have that same kind of, like, struggle that a lot of older people talk about a lot. But we have, like, our own things that we like to talk about.
Well, I think that's definitely why the church, that is contributed to why they lowered the age, right? To get people more invested earlier on and more... Yeah.
Like the age for the mission.
Yeah, more than the mission age.
Yeah. My mission president on my mission very clearly at one mission conference came out and said, like, statistically speaking, you are most likely to stay in the church if you serve a mission when you are 19 and get married as soon as possible when you get home. Mm-hmm. So each of you should get married as soon as possible. It was just a very statistical thing. Yeah,
it's no surprise. In terms of a personal introduction, I am a senior at Utah State University. I don't currently go to church. I don't consider myself to be a believer. I served an LDS mission from January 2008 to March 2010. I actually extended. We can talk about that later maybe when we do individual podcasts, but I was very active, I held a number of leadership positions as a young child. I was very dedicated, very faithful. But when I was about 15 or 16, I began to wonder whether my beliefs were true. I began to wonder whether or not what people had taught me all my life was actually the case, because I'd only heard one side. So I began to just go on the internet, and I think that this is maybe kind of goes to the thrust of our podcast, is that, like, I discovered a lot of things that really bothered me, that I felt like I'd never heard before. The Adam God theory, polygamy, blacks in the priesthood, things that I'd never really heard about in church, I discovered on the internet. And so this is actually around the time that John DeLynne's podcast was coming out in around 2005 or 2006, and his podcast really helped me to realize that I wasn't the only one. And I think that that's what's been important about the internet, is I wasn't the only one who'd heard of these things. I didn't discover just some cabal all of a sudden, you know what I'm saying? But anyways, so I struggled with these issues before I left on my mission, but decided to exercise faith, and in God and the church, and I went on my mission. I had a great mission, had a good time, but I don't believe anymore. But that's where I'm at. I think right now I don't know if I plan on changing, but who knows? Time passes, but anyways.
Time wounds all heals.
Exactly. Nice.
Time wounds all heals. My name's Josh DeFries. I'm also studying economics and international studies. Well, my name's Josh DeFries. I'm studying international studies and economics at Utah State University. I'm also a senior. I got back from a mission in Brisbane, Australia in December of 2011. And since that time, in those 2.5 years, I have come out of the closet, reconsidered my faith, and declared myself a pantheist. So it's been a productive 2.5 years. No, but in all seriousness, I grew up rather devout. I had all of the traditional struggles of a gay Mormon living a closeted life. Lots of difficulties, blah de blah de blah. But I was also like very devout, and
that's how you treat it.
Well, it was an extremely traumatic experience for me.
It's like I was subjected to all sorts of mental and emotional harm, but
what else? Anyway, but where was I? I totally forgot where I was. Oh yeah, I was a very, very devout and very spiritual person. I still consider myself very spiritual, but I encountered doubts and stuff on the internet at a pretty young age, 13 or 14, but didn't really pay much heed. And then started studying Eastern philosophies my senior year of high school, and that really changed the way I viewed my faith. I was kind of unorthodox even on my mission, and then just continued reconsidering things when I got home and decided to come out. I'm currently not active. I don't consider myself an orthodox believer by any means in Mormonism or in any religion. I see religion mostly as metaphor that helps us learn more about ourselves. So in that way, I'm still very interested in approaching Mormonism and seeing what it can teach me about myself.
All right, and my name's Grant Patty. I'm a student at Utah State University. I'm a junior studying economics and political science, and I grew up in the church. Pretty traditional. What's the word I'm looking for? Upbringing. Yeah, that's the word. And I served a mission in Columbus, Ohio, for 2 years. Both before my mission and afterwards, I experienced a crisis of faith. But I would consider myself, right now I'm active. I go to church. I enjoy it. I would consider myself kind of like a progressive, agnostic Mormon. I don't know everything. I think that I have good reasons to believe in God and good reasons to believe that the church is a place to connect with God and with the community, but I also think that there are reasons not to as well. So I'm choosing to stay and to continue to participate in the community that I love and the faith I've been raised in. So that's me.
I'm Ian Summers. I think technically I'm a junior at Utah State.
Who knows in college?
Studying economics and communication studies. As far as my background, generations of my family have been in the church. I think it's 2 or 3 grades back, grandfather and his brother went back as part of the rescue party for the Martin, or the handcart company.
Martin and Willie.
Yeah, Martin and Willie, right? Grew up in the church. My father describes me as being a sober child as a kid, so I've been thoughtful.
Moroni.
Yeah, that's... Yep.
There you go.
So I was very thoughtful.
You had no alcohol as a child. Just does my heart good.
So I was very thoughtful at a young age and have been for a long time. I mean, I got my patriarchal blessing at age 10. So, I would say a very non-traditional childhood, but one steeped in religion and thought, that sort of thing. So I'm active member of the church, but I come from a very thoughtful background, and I think in my mind almost all human action is a search for happiness. And so I look at things in a very individualistic approach. What helps individuals in their own struggle find happiness. And I think that sometimes that leads to the church. I think sometimes it leads out of it. And I don't claim to know what will make other people happy.
Yeah, so what we're doing with this podcast is we wanted to give our generation more of a voice. And obviously all four of us, you know, going to the same school and having the same major, even though we have different dual majors, like, we don't speak for all millennials, but we kind of feel like there's really like no one that speaks for millennials. Like there's
millennials speak for millennials.
Right, exactly. Millennials speak for millennials, but
young people,
and so but most of the Mormon themed blogs and podcasts are run by older people with
except
careers.
For young Mormon feminists.
Except for young Mormon feminists, that's right. But that's focused more on feminist issues, and we didn't want to just limit ourselves, and not that they just limit themselves, but we didn't want to have a scope that was that narrow. We wanted to be a little more broad.
And I think to clarify something, we're not in this podcast just going to be discussing like how doubt affects millennials or how millennials deal with doubt. What we're going to be doing is inviting millennial voices to come and talk about traditional issues. So I think that we're going to be taking like two general different approaches to this. One kind of a Mormon stories approach where we invite in different interesting young people who are dealing with their faith in interesting ways and just have them tell their story. And then another, like we're going to do today, where we have short readings that we get together and discuss as a group.
Yeah.
Kind of where this originated is that the four of us work together, and we would often get distracted by lengthy conversations about Mormonism that really were really interesting and quite edifying and uplifting, if I do say so myself. And I do. They were of good report, and so we were like, well, hey, why don't we just record these conversations? And so that was kind of the genesis.
Well, that's invite everyone else into our office.
And that's what I think is one of the core things, is that I'm sure we're not the only ones who do it. Yeah. If we are, we won't have listenership, and it won't matter. But I really think that these conversations are ones that not only have helped me and helped the four of us, I think, like you were saying, very uplifting, but it's something that as we hope to reach out into the community with this, that we can get people who are wanting to have these conversations with us and to bring those different viewpoints to help us learn and see it from different places.
And I think also one thing that I really hope to gain from this is I think that a lot of other podcasts are coming out and being like, hey guys, there's a problem here in Mormonism. Like, things are happening, we need to think about things. I don't think that's the purpose of the podcast. I think that like most of the people who are in our audience and who are talking kind of get there are problems. I think for us it's more about like, what are we going to do about it? And I think that it's more towards forming a future. And so I'd really like to get a community of people who are discussing ways that Mormonism can change productively, and not from the top down, from the bottom up. The ways that individual people can change the ways that they view Mormonism that are productive for them in their lives. And so that kind of like forward-looking view is kind of what I see this podcast doing.
Yeah, and I like that, especially because there's a lot of podcasts that catalog all of the different problems with church history or church culture or whatever, and like we'll definitely be discussing that, but that doesn't have, like, I don't think that should be our main focus. Like, the idea of us moving forward, okay, these problems exist, but what do we do with them? Like, how do we live life as a Mormon? How do we live life not as a Mormon? What do we do with ourselves? Because, I mean, we're young, we have, like, our whole life ahead of us, so what do we want to make the rest of it, and how do we get there?
Yeah, because there's so many questions you encounter once you question Mormonism. I mean, if you decide to leave, like Andrew and I have, it's like, well, then what is morality? How am I going to live in this world? How do I make decisions? And if you decide to stay, like both of you two have, then it's like, well, how do I approach these things? What do these things actually mean in my life? Which ones do I follow? Which ones do I don't? If I'm really going to take an individualistic approach to it, So.
And I'm just interested in just like getting a sense of the waters, a sense of like, I think, because I do think it is a situation the church has never faced, where young people have been just inundated with a lot of information that the church, until recently, hasn't really acknowledged or talked about, and it's just a unique situation that I think deserves airtime.
Yeah, and I think we also need to have we want to have a diversity of voices as well. So we want to have people that are out of the church, people that are very, very much in the church, and then people that are kind of in between. And then
Well, yeah. So I mean, oftentimes we think of it as this spectrum of in the church or out of the church, and it's more like a 3D model, and there's this giant sphere of all these different points along it. I mean,
and I think it's interesting because I mean, even like Grant is staying for different reasons than Ian, and I've left for different reasons than Andrew.
Sure.
And so it's interesting how like we have all this convergence, but also divergence in our individual stories, and so it'll be interesting to examine that with people. Another thing I hope is that as people listen to this podcast, if they have things to say or if they have an interesting story, then to contact us and be like, hey, I'd like to be on the podcast. Because I think that'd be wonderful to just have people from, like, not just here. I mean, we can get people on the phone to call in and do a podcast with us. I think that would be great. So just open invitation. If you have interesting things to say, then tell us.
Yeah, shameless plug. Find us on Facebook, Mormon Millennials Podcast.
Yeah.
We'll get a Facebook page up. Well, we do.
We do, yeah.
Okay, so like us on Facebook.
If you're find us on the website, we'll have a link to that, and we'll have an email at the bottom of it. Haven't set that up yet, but we'll have it when it goes up.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other important thing to understand too is that all of us here are friends, and we disagree about things, but when we discuss things, we're going to be discussing ideas. So, if Andrew and I disagree, or if Josh and Ian disagree about something, what we're concerned about is the idea, just because we disagree with each other doesn't mean that we can't be friends.
We'll still go to lunch.
Speaking of lunch.
Yeah.
That's one thing I really like about what we've cultivated here, like in our working relationship, is that we disagree with each other constantly, and yet we're all still such great friends.
Right.
So I hope that on this podcast we'll be able to cultivate an attitude of empathy towards anyone. So I mean, like, I really honestly disagree with the church and don't think it's true, but I like really respect people who, have really strong spiritual ties to the church and want to stay in it, and I'd like to hear what they have to say. And this is something that I'm very serious about, and I make that clear because people have questioned me on how serious I am about this, that I value disagreement. And yes, I may disagree with Grant, but I value that he disagrees with me. Like, I don't want everyone to agree with me. Like,
we don't want an echo chamber.
Yeah. No.
Well, what you were saying with that we can be friends despite disagreement, I think part of it is that this healthy disagreement through empathy. I mean, we are friends, and since we disagree, it only strengthens it. I don't think the strength is in spite of it, but it's almost enabled by it as well.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I really look forward to with connecting with other people through this, is that we'll get to both agree and disagree with other people, and just learn and have those sorts of relationships, and the strength we can gain just from the relationships we have with each other, no matter what path we choose.
Right.
That strength is something beautiful to me.
Well, like, I remember when I was a believer and I was younger, like, I would look at people who didn't believe in the church, who had left, and I would just think they were like a boogeyman, like, like what, but you realize that, they have important things to say, and I think that just the internet, the miracle of it, for all the bad things that people say on comments page on YouTube, but people, there is, it does foster communication, and people you otherwise wouldn't have access to or talk to, you can readily access them.
Yeah.
And I think something bringing us back to like the forward looking, I guess, attitude that I would like to cultivate. What am I even saying? So going back to like this forward looking, what's the word, outlook? This forward looking outlook. Is I really wish this is an attitude that could be adopted in more and Mormonism as a whole. So that, because I feel like people who have left the church are still very much a part of the community. I mean, like a lot of people say, Mormonism is more like an ethnicity or anything else, right? You don't leave the community wholly, rarely ever. And so I really wish that people who were completely out of the church could look at their Orthodox friends and family and be like, you have things to offer me. And Orthodox people still in the church could look at, like the people who are out of the church and doing things they think are crazy and be like, well, cool, you have things to offer me, and really cultivate, I'm using that word over and over and over, and really develop, more of an attitude of we can all learn from each other because we disagree. Not in spite of it, because of it.
Yeah. So that said, do we want to start with our
article? Yeah, for sure.
So Josh, tell us, how did you find this article? Where did this come from?
So some random Facebook friend, I don't even remember who, posted a link to this interesting article that's not new. It was published, I think, about 2 years ago by the church, directed towards youth. It was written by David A. Edwards, called "What to Do When You Have Questions," and I thought that would make a really good discussion for our first podcast. Because that's kind of, questions are what brought each of us here today.
Indeed.
We were brought here by questions. And so we want to, I guess, engage with what he's saying in this article. So, Grant, would you like to just give us a summary of what he says in the article?
Okay, yeah. So, did we want to, summarize it? Did we want to like go through this, like read it, or
I don't think read it. I think just give us like the gist of it, like
just some context.
What is
the
his
discussion? I think.
What is his conclusion?
So, well, I'll just read the first line. It says, "Asking questions is essential for learning, but how you ask a question can make a huge difference in where it leads you." And the article draws this distinction, which I don't think is a very good one, but we'll get into that, between questioning and asking questions. It says, "The difference has to do with how and why you're asking the questions, what you hope to gain from them, and where they'll eventually lead you." And then they define questioning. It says, "Questioning here refers to challenging, disputing, or picking something apart. When it comes to religion, the result of this approach is often not to find answers, but rather to find fault and destroy confidence. On the other hand, in religion, just as in science or anything else we're studying, it's absolutely essential to ask questions, even difficult ones. It's the only way you'll get answers. And answers mean greater knowledge and understanding, and in the case of religion, greater faith and spirituality." So that's how, that's from the article, how they define this approach between the two. Later they have some quotes where it talks about, so when you get these questions, it's okay to have doubt. They mention that, but they say essentially that it's only okay to have doubt so long as it gets resolved. That you can't have doubt that stays.
Well, and you have to. What I think of the difference is questioning versus asking questions is when you're asking questions, you know what the outcome needs to be. You know what your conclusion is before you start.
Yeah.
Whatever question you're going to ask has to have the conclusion the church is true at the end, right? But if you're questioning, everything is open to you, and I think that's what they think that questioning is dangerous. Asking questions is okay.
Well, I mean, questions are dangerous. That's what's so wonderful about them.
But don't you? I mean, I think that the church has really had a shift on this. I mean, I think I read a quote by I think it was J. Reuben Clark that talks about, if we have the truth, then it cannot be harmed, right? And we can investigate it to the full extent. But I think that this is just it to me evinces a sort of reactionary attitude. It's not really exploratory. It's not adventurous. It's not brave. It's it seems to me more fearful. I mean, the very last quote on the back by Thomas S. Monson says, "Should doubt knock at your doorway, just say to those skeptical, disturbing, rebellious thoughts, I propose to stay with my faith and with the faith of my people. I know that happiness and contentment are there, and I forbid you, agnostic, doubting thoughts, to destroy the house of my faith. I acknowledge that I do not understand the processes of creation, but I accept the fact of it. I grant that I cannot explain the miracles of the Bible, and I do not attempt to do so, but I accept God's word. I wasn't with Joseph, but I believe him. My faith did not come to me through science, and I will not permit so-called science to destroy it."
I love that. I love the so-called science. Something this like makes me think of is this dichotomy between faith and doubt. Like, why are faith and doubt at odds with each other? Because to me, I think that like why can't they be producing each other? So, like two stanzas of poetry that have really influenced my own spiritual journey are from Lord Alfred Tennyson's In Memoriam. He's writing about his friend. And he says, "Perplexed in faith, but pure in deeds, at last he beat his music out. There lives more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds. He fought his doubts and gathered strength. He would not make his judgment blind. He faced the specters of his mind and laid them. Thus he came at length to find a stronger faith his own. And power was with him in the night, which makes the darkness and the light, and dwells not in the light alone." And I love that because that one line, "There lives more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds," really struck me because I love what Andrew is saying, that like this is a very fearful attitude. And it's interesting because Mormonism teaches that there is no fear in faith. And so if faith is fearless, then shouldn't faith like be prospered by doubt? Like if you have a fearless doubt, like I'm going to question everything, isn't that a faithful attitude? To say like in my honest doubt, there is manifested a profound faith that there is a truth to be found.
Well, and I think that, I like that. And I think that even if we turn to the scriptures themselves, so you go to Alma chapter 32, and this is like probably my favorite chapter in like all of the standard works or whatever, but in verse 18 where he says, "For if a man knoweth a thing," verse 18 it says, "Now I ask, is this faith? Behold, I say unto you, nay, for if a man knoweth a thing, he hath no cause to believe, for he knoweth it." And so even like Alma says, okay, like faith is not the same as knowledge. And so I don't know what definition of doubt they're using here, but if we use the definition of doubt as you don't know, then it seems like doubt is an essential ingredient to faith, that you must have doubt in order to have faith. And I feel like in my own life, that's kind of how it works. Like I definitely have a lot of doubts about the church. I have a lot of doubts about God or different things like that. But yet I still go forward. Like I go to church, like I fulfill my callings, like I do these things because I do find happiness there. And like, I don't know what else you can call that other than faith. Like I don't think it really has much to do with what certain things you assert as being true as much as it has to do with the type of life you're leading despite the different questions or things you may have.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that gets core to this, well, and before I move forward, I just want to make one thing, that this was written towards youth, so I'm sure it's a very
simplistic,
basic and structural discussion coming from the church, not as nuanced as something that we're doing here, but I think it is indicative of oftentimes the stance that the church as an entity will take and things like that. But I think one of the core things here that we get to is what is the nature of truth, right? So for me, there's this element of truth that's creative, that there are truths that don't exist, and then we take action, and then those truths do. And so it's like somebody who says, I will be a successful person. And they may not know what that success looks like, but they promise to do it, and they work at it. And so for me, truth, being that it does have this creative nature at its core, I see doubt as this wondering and wandering that allows us to see the different options, the different truths that can be, rather than the truth that is. And it's a beautiful way of looking forward. So as an example of this, one of the things I really like to do is read personality into the scriptures that I didn't used to do as a younger person, as a child. And so when Nephi says, I will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded, right now in my life, I don't read it as, I will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded. I read it more of him convincing himself to take action, sort of in this doubtful state where Nephi says, well, yeah, I think I'm going to go do this. and he goes and he tests his faith, and he takes action and creates truth. And I think that is enabled by doubt, and it allows for a faithful action that we don't get if we assume an answer.
What is faith, though? Like, I mean, I've been reading Peter Boghossian's Manual for Creating Atheists, and his definition of faith, I think, is apt, is that faith is pretending to know things that you don't know. It's a knowledge claim. If I say, and this is different than hope, if I say, I hope that my father recovers from this surgery, there's an element of uncertainty there that is inherent to that. But if I say, I have faith that my father is going to survive this surgery, like, that's different. I feel like that's a certainty. That's asserting a certainty of something you don't know. So when I hear the word faith, it to me is pretending to know something that I don't know about. I have faith that the leaders of the church are inspired, but when I look at history, when I look at a lot of different issues, it to me seems that's not the case, right? At least in my personal experience. But I honestly don't think faith is a good way to live.
I kind of disagree.
You kind of disagree?
I do disagree. And the reason is because I don't think faith is a certainty. I think it's the opposite. I think that faith is action despite uncertainty. So I think that faith is accepting uncertainty. So Alan Watts says that faith is like if you're in water and you're like scrambling to float, and the scrambling like makes you sink. So faith is when you just learn to trust the water and float on your back. And so it's not certainty, it's actually a letting go. It's like, I don't have to be certain. And I think that if you acted based on the model that you're proposing, that you have to have like rigorous knowledge in order to act in the world, then would anybody ever act? I mean, do we ever know?
Okay, but
we have to delve into the depths of epistemology and solve all the knowledge problems of the world before we can ever take action.
I like this quote by Bertrand Russell. we may define faith as a firm belief in something for which there is no evidence. When there is evidence, no one speaks of faith. We do not speak of faith that 2 and 2 are 4 or that the earth is round. We only speak of faith when we wish to substitute emotion for evidence. The substitution of emotion for evidence is apt to lead to strife since different groups substitute different emotions.
And I think that I agree with that. Like, it depends really on what definition of faith we're using here. I think this is really just what our dispute is. Like, if faith just basically means asserting that a thing is true with no evidence for it, then I see no virtue in that. I see no point or benefit in just saying, well, this thing is true even though I have no evidence. But what I see faith for me as is, okay, I'm in a place of uncertainty, I don't know, but I'm going to act in such a way that I think will bring me and those around me the most happiness.
But, I mean, for example, this is what like, people want to say, faith, like, I have faith, faith is like love, I'd have faith that my, like, parents love me or something, but no, like, if your, like, parents beat you, or you're, or you're hanging out with someone, you're trying to get a girl to go on a date with you and she just ignores your calls all the time, or she never answers your texts, like, there's evidence there that you can look at to see how someone feels about you, right? That I think that faith in this sense.
Well, so I tend to agree with Josh on the definition of faith being that it's an action based in doubt. So faith is enabled by doubt.
But you wouldn't keep texting this girl.
No,
like, so it's like, I have faith that she's going to go on a date with me.
Faith is
you have to accept the evidence.
Faith is getting over the fear to text her in the first place. That's what I would say. I would say faith is saying, like, I have no idea whether or not this guy is going to whether or not this girl is going to text me back, right?
This person
of indeterminate gender and sexual orientation is going, okay, actually this is a good example, because, like, there are guys that sometimes I'm interested in, but, like, I don't know if they're gay, right? And so, like, I have to act without a knowledge problem, and sometimes,
okay, but then
well, I don't know,
but then you get evidence.
Yeah, but so based on evidence you change, right? So that's why I agree with Bertrand Russell, and I think that faith needs to be tempered by reason. But I don't think that's a reason to let go of the concept of faith altogether.
So what I would say is, if you're continuing to hold on to a belief that you will call faith despite evidence to the contrary, and I mean, if you like a girl and she's obviously not into you, and you continue to act and say, I have faith that she's going to like me at one point in time, that's just lying in my mind.
Well, okay, but see, that's why I think the difference between hope and faith is different. I think what you're talking about is hope. Like, I like this person. I have some degree of I'm uncertain about what their reaction is going to be.
I don't think it's hope. I think it's experimentation. Right?
Well,
I'm going to take an experiment. No, I think it's very scientific. I think that faith is the instance where you say, I believe that I can discover something about the world by taking action, so I will take action and mindfully observe my results, and then change my actions based upon the results of my experimentation. I think the scientific method is based on faith. Like, but I don't buy Mormonism, so obviously my version of faith is very, very different than one of the concepts of Mormonism.
What do you see as being wrong with the definition of faith?
So what I think is wrong with faith in the Mormonism context is that I see faith as the acceptance of uncertainty and acting in uncertainty, whereas I think Mormonism too often sees faith as certainty. So I think that Mormonism is misdefining faith, and because of that, losing out on a rich spiritual experience of accepting uncertainty and worshiping mystery.
Well, we see this in the words people use when they bear their testimony. They don't say, I have faith that the church is true, right? Which is like, that's more reasonable, but I know.
Yeah.
Like, I just think that.
Well, at that point, it's like, well, sir, I don't think we can have a conversation anymore because we don't mean the same thing by these terms. When I say no, I mean that you've gone through a rigorous process of data analysis.
Right. Right. Well, and if you don't say no, if you don't say, I know the church is true, if someone says I believe, like, try saying that in sacrament meeting.
Dude, I've done that.
What happened?
Okay, so, like, this was probably 9 months ago. I got up in Fast and Testimony meeting and basically said that I don't know if the church is true. I don't know if there's a God, but the kind of God that Joseph Smith taught and the kind of God that I was raised to believe in is really the only kind of God that I could believe in. And so that I continue to, come and come to church, and in that sense I have faith. Well, like, I had people, like, the bishop didn't say anything, like, like, I had people afterwards that were like, I really liked what you had to say, and I I feel like there are a lot of people in the church that do feel this way, but when we create this rhetoric of absolute certainty that you have to have, that there are a lot of people that feel very uncomfortable during fast and testimony meeting or in other times in the church because they can't share that same level of certainty. They feel like, oh, like the church isn't for me, I don't have faith, I don't belong, and I think that that's not good.
To be completely honest, I think that it's often just a case of the emperor's new clothes, and testimony is just a naked king, and we're all saying, it's wearing clothes, but because we don't want to be the only ones like, actually, he's naked, so we're all afraid of coming out and saying it.
And that's why I think this idea of questioning versus asking questions is actually harmful, because people should be able to they should be free to follow the evidence where it leads them.
Yeah.
And that's what I felt was most harmful to me in Mormonism, was that I had to have my conclusions already set out for me before I began.
Yeah, so in here they say, so basically they're talking about if you come upon some passage of scripture that seems to contradict a church teaching or a scientific or historical fact, that there's two ways to approach it. In the stripped down way they put it, but they say, how can the scriptures of the church possibly be true in light of this new insight? Or you could ask or the other way to ask it is, what's the full context of this passage and what does it mean in light of this new insight? And so that second one I think is a beautiful way of reading it. So if you say, what is the full context of this, like what are all the things I can know about this, given within reason, I think that would be a beautiful way to attack questions, but I don't think that people read this and actually go and do it. I think we're too often said, I've got a list of answers and I've got a list of questions like a test in middle school, and I can just draw lines between them. And life is so much more complex than that.
Yeah.
And you can't look at it as, I've got my list of answers and I've got my list of questions, and how do I get these two things to line up and somehow work in some worldview. I think the world is paradoxical, and there are going to be lines that don't just connect. And it's how do we move forward to reach the happiness that we can have in spite of these paradoxes and these questions that never will have answers. There are things that are just unknowable.
Right, but I like... Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I think that like an example of, they say questioning, or an example of questioning that they give is if you ask, how could the scriptures or the church be possibly true if blank? Well, that is exactly how a scientist goes about evaluating a hypothesis. Like they have a question, or they have a statement that they put forward, and then they look at the evidence. They go out and they run their experiment, they gather the evidence, and then they come back and they say, okay, if they get contradictory evidence, they have to ask themselves, how could my hypothesis possibly be true given that the evidence contradicts it? And
Rant and his so-called science.
Let's get your so-called science out of here.
I like your point.
Yeah, and so I think that's actually a really good way of looking at things, or at least it's a more scientific way of looking at things. But the problem is, if you eliminate this kind of question, then what you've done is you've set up a list of statements that are no longer falsifiable. If you can't ask this question, then whatever statement you are making is no longer falsifiable. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
Well, what I think... I mean, just imagine if someone were making this argument from a Mormon perspective. Imagine if someone were making this argument from a different perspective, from a Jehovah's Witness perspective or a Scientology perspective. And here they say questioning here refers to challenging, disputing, or picking something apart. Wasn't that what Mormons do to determine why they would be Mormon as opposed to Baptist?
No, they just testify. It's not about tearing down other churches. It's about tearing your own.
No, but really though, you're exactly right. So on my mission, obviously we didn't Bible bash, but when you would discuss a point of doctrine with someone, when I remember discussing the idea of free will with a group of Calvinists, I'm picking apart, I am disputing, challenging, picking apart their notion of free will not existing, of predestination. I'm picking apart predestination as a missionary because it doesn't make sense. And so, theologically. And so, you definitely, as a missionary, you ask people to do this with their own faith. Like, you want them to challenge their own faith. I mean, when you ask them to read the Book of Mormon, like, that is like, hey, look, this is something else that is not from something you've grown up with, and it's going to challenge you, and that's okay, but we're not able to do that to ourselves, and I think that's inconsistent, and I think that's a double standard.
I agree, and I think the double standard becomes especially dangerous when Mormonism tries to enter into the public sphere, you know, making public arguments against gay marriage, or, you know, against alcohol, or for alcohol partitions in restaurants, you know, I don't know, things like that, where religious views are now entering into the public domain. Like, these are not public arguments. You're not making public arguments at all. You're making assertions based on assumptions, and assertions based on assumptions are not going to get us anywhere.
I agree.
I think it's funny. If someone listening to this who doesn't know us is going to get so confused as to, like, who's the believing one and who's not. I was defending faith.
Stop it!
Rants, like, over here talking about, like, oh, science is so much more important, and they're going to be like, I don't know which voice is which and who has which agenda.
Well, see, and I think that's just so fascinating about our generation. Is I don't think we're unique, and hopefully we can build up a community of other people who also are able to, you know, look at things in a more nuanced perspective and be more critical and more thoughtful, not only of others, but of their own positions.
Oh, you can go.
No, well, I think moving forward as we, like, tackle, I mean, not every one of these podcasts is going to be all four of us sitting around and talking.
Yeah.
And hopefully that we're able to show our personalities and our beliefs and different things. Like, I'd love to do a podcast on why I think Mormonism leads me to libertarianism and why, right?
And I'll get one about why Mormonism leads me to Marxism. Oh, wait, sorry, I'm not Mormon anymore. I forgot.
Well, no, but I think that according to my beliefs within Mormonism and the narratives that are told about the pre-existence, I don't think you can stand up against gay marriage. I think it is against the beliefs that are held with that. Granted, I'm the same guy that says there's paradoxes that it might, you know. But
it's against D.C. 131. It says it's not fit to mix religious and civic influence. Right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a whole podcast that could be done on that. But
you can
go.
Well, I just wanted to, like, what were you going to talk about? Sorry.
I was going to go back to, you were talking about how we separate ideas from people and talk about relationships.
Okay, so. Well, I wanted to, I'll save this for, like, my closing thoughts. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring this back to something Grant was saying at the very beginning that I think is something that we've done pretty successfully in our conversations, is separating people from ideas. So we feel very free to, like, criticize each other's ideas and question and stuff without ever getting, like, personally hurt. And I think a big problem in Mormonism, and the reason that questioning becomes so emotional, is because people tie up their individual worth with their thoughts and what people think about them with what people think about what they believe. And I think it goes back to, like, the persecution complex that has driven Mormonism for a long time. I mean, if you go back and read, like, the Journal of Discourses and early general conferences, the persecution complex is, like, very, very clear. And Mormonism was very concerned about what the evangelical community, like, in Missouri thought of them. And it's interesting because they actually, like, switched their position on slavery just to prove that, you know, like, oh, the Missourians were wrong for kicking us out because we're not actually anti-slavery. But and where I'm getting with this is that I think that it's really important that Mormonism move beyond that and realize that we can discuss these ideas with still maintaining close relationships. And I think when people begin to question, doubt, and leave the church, it's so damaging and toxic for the relationships with Orthodox family and friends. And I think that that's something that needs to change. Like, Orthodox people and unorthodox people alike need to realize that thoughts and relationships, like, they can be different. Like, you can think different things.
I don't think Mormonism can maintain that.
I think Mormonism is constantly changing. It can always change.
But if you're going to say that in order to become an eternal family, you have to do A, B, and C, and someone says, I don't believe in doing A, B, and C, then that is antithetical to that viewpoint.
So you're saying Mormonism as it is can't sustain that, but what I'm saying is Mormonism is dynamic and has always been changing and will continue to change.
Mormonism as it can be.
Mormonism as it can be. The uncreated
as it may become.
Towards which we are moving.
Right, because, I mean, what is Mormonism? Like, it is just people. Like, we are all...
Okay, guys, Mormons don't make that claim. You can't make...
No, but, like...
we're saying this is what we want to tell them it is. We're going to shove this down their throats.
No, seriously. Like, Mormonism is a large group of people that hold similar beliefs about things, led by people who claim to speak for God.
Right. Two of them think the same thing.
Right, and none of those people even think the same thing. And so, like, it's not... My point was, when we talk about Mormonism as it can be, I think we have to understand, like, obviously, even from a believing perspective, Mormonism is not perfect. because it is made up of people who are not perfect.
Not the church.
Well, I think that's a very good point, is that oftentimes in Mormonism we conflate, and I'll claim 3 separations, at least here and for this discussion. I think we conflate the church, the gospel, and the culture. So I think there are things
Elder Pullman had to re-record a conference talk.
Right.
Be careful.
Yeah.
You might have to re-record this podcast if the general authorities hear it.
Well, I bought the domain, so but I really think that the gospel and the core to it, there's something beautiful. But I think there's also action taken just for church administration purposes, and that there are certain efficiency benefits that come from that for a large bureaucratic organization. And then I think there are things that organically grow out of a culture that should be questioned. And oftentimes people don't separate the 3 out in their mind, and so they see something that grows from culture or that's done for an administrative purpose as coming from God and being core to the gospel, and it just, in my mind, can't be that way at times.
Did we want to do closing thoughts? We can go in for like an hour.
Well, in the first 20 minutes is going to be cut down to like 6,
okay.
But that'll be about where we'll want to be on time-wise, right?
Yeah, 45.
I think we should do some closing thoughts.
Yeah,
that's a good idea. So just wrapping it up, what do each of us think about this topic, and what does that mean for humanity?
I personally don't try to live by faith. I don't think that it's a good way of living. I don't think that it's good to just assert things and then, based on a lack of evidence, continue to persist in that. I mean, it was so refreshing to me when I was finally able to admit to myself, like, I don't think Mormonism is true. I mean, I went through metaphysics this semester, and it was just so refreshing to be able to read whatever I wanted to without feeling like, oh, how does this have to accord with my already held preconceived notions? I was able to realize, oh, maybe there are no such thing as real objects, or maybe we don't have free will. I didn't have to, I used to have so much anxiety and, just wrestle with these questions. How can I, reconcile this statement and that statement? But I don't think it's mentally healthy. I don't think that it leads to a good way of life.
I would tend to completely agree with Andrew if we're accepting his definition of faith. If faith is a certainty, then I completely agree. Where I disagree is that I don't think that's what faith is, and I think that one of the reasons is because I think that other faith traditions view faith differently. And I mean, a lot of my thoughts and feelings on faith are informed by like Buddhism and Taoism, and so for me, faith is very important, but it's very important as an embracing of uncertainty, and it's very important when tempered with reason. And for me personally, I think the scientific method is faith. It's moving forth, embracing uncertainty, and learning how to act in the world with uncertainty. And I think that this article is very antithetical to that, because it's just assumptions and assertions, right? You just assume that the base of it is true, and you target your questions so that you can find out the predetermined answer, which I think is deeply dangerous. And I think that's something that we developed in this discussion that I really like, is the idea of an uncreated Mormonism, that Mormonism is not yet what it will become, and that we can make it into whatever we want. Like right now I'm not really participating. I guess doing this is participating in the community, so I am participating in the community.
Participate.
I am participating now. I don't go to church. I still have discussions and stuff, but I do think that we, like, Mormonism means to us what it means to us individually, and we can change that. We can, like, Andrew was
try
telling
telling
me,
Boycade Packer that, though.
You know what? I have just as much authority as Boycade Packer. Sorry, but I think the priesthood is fake, and I think that as a breath-breathing human being, I have the same amount of authority as Boycade Packer to say what my culture and my faith means to me. So,
but Mormonism isn't a culture. It is a metaphysics. It is a worldview.
It's a worldview that's constantly evolving.
But they don't view it that way.
What I'm talking about is an individual Mormonism. I'm saying Mormonism can change if we talk more, if we open, if we change things.
Well, and like Mormonism certainly is evolving, and I guess, can I take my...
Yeah, I was done.
Okay, cool. Like, Mormonism is evolving, it's changing. I mean, anybody who's looked at any of history...
We don't say that we should kill homosexuals anymore, right?
But we should!
Okay.
We shouldn't laugh!
Said the gay one.
I guess you're gay, so
I just have to say that because I might not recognize my gay voice.
So... This is one of my very, very favorite statements from a church leader. This is from President Hugh B. Brown, and
he was a good man.
He was a good man, and
we need more Hugh B. Browns around.
We do, And he, well, I'll just read it to you, and I want you guys to know that this is what I see Mormonism, this is what I see its possibilities being. This is what I think Mormonism can become, and I think that if we take President Brown's statement here seriously, it will do us a tremendous amount of good. He says, I have been very grateful that the freedom, dignity, and integrity of the individual are basic in church doctrine. We are free to think and express our opinion in the church. Fear will not stifle thought. I admire men and women who have developed the questing spirit, who are unafraid of new ideas as stepping stones to progress. We should, of course, respect the opinions of others, but we should also be unafraid to dissent if we are informed. We should be dauntless in our pursuit of truth and resist all demands for unthinking conformity. No one would have us become mere tape recorders of other people's thoughts. While I believe all that God has revealed, I am not quite sure I understand what he has revealed. And the fact that God has promised further revelation is, to me, a challenge to keep an open mind and be prepared to follow wherever my search for truth may lead. Now, I see Andrew smirking at me now.
Go on. I just want to... I'll say something after.
Well,
that's great. I love that.
Clearly this article is not following in that direction, but I think we can. Like, obviously, many church leaders take this seriously, and many don't. But I think that this is really important counsel for us. And, like, the church has not been great at following this counsel, but I think that we can do better.
Well, I mean, when was the last time you ever heard that spoken in a public setting? Why is that not printed in the Ensign? Why is that not printed?
That's why we're saying it now.
In the seminary youth manuals, you know, instead we get these things of asking a question versus questioning, or doubt your doubts.
So I think this comes back to what we were saying at the beginning, though, is that we recognize there's a problem in Mormonism, and what we're talking about is like, how can we change things, right? By talking about these things, we can, I think, affect change, at least in the people who listen to us and the people who.
Well, I mean, it's like the idea of, you know, it's not meet for us to be commanded in all things. Like, sometimes you just do something because
milk for the teenagers, meat for the millennials.
That's what we should have called the podcast. Meat for the millennials.
I object to both of those.
Okay,
I'm vegan. I don't eat those things.
Oh, that's right. We should do an episode on veganism.
Oh yeah, for sure. But you know, but I just feel like, I mean, everything that Hugh B. Brown says in that's perfectly fine, but that's going to lead people to not come to the same sorts of conclusions that leadership wants you to.
If you take, I think that this fear of doubt shows that they think that there's a weakness in their position. I think that if you have faith in your own position, then you would be unafraid of someone asking whatever question they want.
Hence correlation.
And you wouldn't be afraid of changing your mind. This is
you wouldn't be afraid of changing.
This is something. This is the reason. I actually have. I shouldn't talk about that. I was going to talk about a person, and I was like, I shouldn't talk about that. But there are people.
We don't need to name names.
There are people in our lives who are very certain about things, and I was thinking about an individual in my life who was like very, very certain about things. I was thinking about like the difference between me and this person, and I realized like it's that he or she has a dedication to answers, while I have a dedication to questions. And I think that if we dedicate ourselves to questions, sometimes we can seem like we change a lot because the questions lead us to new evidence that then changes us. But I think that Mormonism asks interesting questions that I continue to ask. What is my own divine potential? What can I make in the world? That's something that Mormonism inspired in me, because Mormonism taught me that I am a child of God who was made to be a creator. And so that has instilled in me the question, what can I make with this world? And so I think that Mormonism gives us great questions. It's just not always great answers.
Well, I think the answers. I think the answers are so much easier to give than questions. Like, what's difficult is coming up with a meaningful question that can get at an approximation of the right answer. Like, it's very difficult to come up with a thoughtful question. It's very easy just to come up with an answer to something.
Well, I printed off another quote before this because I thought that these were all interesting quotes that I wanted to bring up. Richard Feynman, the famed physicist, says, I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. And I agree with that.
Agree.
I think that that's a much better way to live. It's way more authentic. It has more integrity, I think, and it's more in line with my values.
And you might not like me saying this, but I think that's a deeply religious way to live, because to me, religion is the embrace of mystery. I think religion is what happens when we bundle up all the mysteries in the universe, call it God, and worship it.
It's a spiritual way.
It's a spiritual, yeah. Okay, maybe not religious, because religion is like more organized, tendally, or like a theology. But yeah, a very spiritual way.
Yeah, so to finish up, one of the things, and this won't show the economic side of me, but I view Joseph Smith as a sort of religious entrepreneur.
No.
And
what was that?
So I view Joseph Smith as this religious entrepreneur, and I see him as embracing unknown. I mean, the first vision was given after asking a question, right? And it was even a question that didn't have an answer he was looking for. I mean, if he was looking for which one to join, it was he didn't have the answer, and it allowed
Depends
for this
on which
growth.
account you're looking at.
Right. I'm sure we'll tackle that at some point, right? But what I think is important is that we oftentimes, and I know I've done this in my past, and I think I can see it in other people's, but that's not for me to judge. I think we relinquish the control over our belief in our religion. I think that oftentimes we're not willing to experiment with ideas and questions and go and just take action without knowing what the outcome's going to be, right? And so I want to see people who are more willing to ask the deep questions, who are willing to take action without knowing the answers, who can act like entrepreneurs in their own lives and take ownership of it, and to move forward without the knowledge. Mm-hmm. Because that, to me, I think there are many truths that could be. I think there are many futures that are possible. And with this almost experimentation that people can have if they engage with questions rather than engaging with answers necessarily, we can see the possibility of all of these different truths, and I think it'll bring us greater levels of happiness.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that if we view Mormonism as like a heritage and like continuing this tradition or whatever, I don't think respecting a heritage means staying the same. I think it's recognizing that heritages are always dynamic, and we have agency to change the heritage in whichever ways we choose, and therefore a responsibility to deeply question the way we interact with faith, and the way we interact with theology, the way we interact with institutions, deeply question all of it with no preconceived conclusion. And I think that's the best way we can honor our heritage.
Yeah, as soon as you think you have all the answers, you can never learn anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
anyways,
this has been Mormon Millennials Podcast. Check us out at mormonmillennials.org or on our Facebook page.
And join our Facebook group and join the conversation with us.
Yes, definitely.
And we'll have another episode out in about a week or so after this one airs. So,
Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening, guys.